So, all great fighter pilot stories start with, there I was. And mine is no different. There I was, 4 years old on my first airplane flight. We fly through the clouds, and they look solid, but then they're all fuzzy inside. After the sun sets, the stewardesses, it's so long ago, that's what we used to call them back then. They take us up to the cockpit so we can see outside. The cockpit door opens, and I'm looking out over the Atlantic Ocean on a moonless night. And there are billion stars in the sky. And I feel breathless. I go running to my mom. Mommy, I want to be a stewardess. And to her credit, Mom, who was born in the 40s and raised in a time when women were expected to stay home and take care of their kids, she looked at me and she said, you might want to think about being a pilot instead. So I did. Jump ahead 20 years, and there I am at Air Force pilot training. It was better than I could have possibly imagined. Loops, aileron rolls, chasing clouds, and pulling G's. I absolutely loved it. Now, a G stands for the gravitational force of the Earth. And most of our life is spent like it is now at 1 G. If you've ever ridden a roller coaster and felt kind of squished down in your seat, you know that feeling? That's what pulling G's feels like. And roller coasters max out at 2 to 3 G's. The T-38 that I flew at pilot training could pull 7.2 G's. And I absolutely loved it. I could have pulled G's all day. As pilot training was coming to an end, I was kind of sad that I was going to have to leave these fun little jets that I learned to love so much. Because at that point in time, women weren't allowed in combat, which meant we couldn't fly fighters. So it was going to be something much bigger than what I'd been used to flying for me in the future. Jump ahead, and there I was, it's 1993. I am just returning from vacation. And I look and there's 4 messages on my answering machine. Hopefully some of you remember answering machines, right? Well, mine had a big flashing red 4. I start listening to the messages, and the first one is from my boss. Call me as soon as you get in. And I thought to myself, I'm on vacation until tomorrow. I don't need to call you right away. And the second message was from my boss, as was the third and the fourth. Each one sounding just a little bit more urgent, and I thought, maybe I actually should call him. So I called and I got in touch with him, and he told me there was a colonel at the Pentagon that wanted to talk to me. I asked what he wanted to talk to me about, and he said he didn't know. Well, at this point in my Air Force career, I'm a captain, which is significantly lower than a colonel. And I've never, ever been to the Pentagon. And I don't talk to colonels very often. So I call this guy, and he tells me he's the aide to General Bowles, who's the chief of staff, or chief of personnel, for all the people in the Air Force. And after swearing me to secrecy, he asks me if I would like to fly the F-16 that I could have had in pilot training. Are you kidding me? Of course I would. Who wouldn't? It's like, okay, nothing's official yet, but come to the Pentagon tomorrow morning and meet with General Bowles. Yes, sir. I couldn't believe it. I might get to fly an F-16, really? So like most people who are getting the opportunity of a lifetime, hopefully anyway, I got to the Pentagon early, like 2 hours early. And I was glad I did. I had never been there, and that place is massive and it's very confusing. So after a few wrong turns and a few stops for directions, there I was, in General Bowles' office. I was sitting there with Martha McSally and Jeannie Flynn, while General Bowles told us that the combat exclusion was lifted, that women were going to get to fly fighters in our Air Force. Jeannie was going to go fly the F-15E, Martha was going to go fly the A-10, and me, I was going to go fly the F-16. I couldn't believe it. The F-16 is the sleekest, best looking, most capable fighter in our Air Force. Single engine, single seat, 9G machine. I couldn't wait. I wanted to jump and shout for joy, but I didn't think the general would appreciate that. So he just said, yes, sir. The next morning, there we are back at the Pentagon, this time for a press conference to introduce us as the first women to fly fighters in our Air Force. Now, I was excited about the F-16, but I really could have done without the dog and pony show. And this press conference, trust me, it is awkward. At the podium is General McPeak, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, and a fighter pilot, who just months earlier had told the press, "I would rather fly with a less qualified man on my wing than a woman." Yeah. So of course the press asked him about that, because now here he is introducing us. It was his chance to step up and be a leader, right? To pave the way for us with our fellow fighter pilots, to help them understand that allowing women to fly fighters would make sure we had the best team going forward. So what did he say? It's possible I may have been wrong. Oh boy. Not the support I was looking for, right? Not at all. But I didn't really care. I was going to get to go fly the F-16. And the next day, there's more press involved. I'm on the Today Show and on CNN, and I'm answering questions about what I think it will be like to be the first woman to fly fighters. So, Captain Preszler, how do you expect to be received by your fellow fighter pilots? "Oh, honey, do you really think you can drop bombs on someone or shoot something?" and my favorite, "So, how exactly do you plan to deal with the animosity from your fellow fighter pilots who don't want women in fighters?" Oh, wait a minute, whoa. You mean General Peak isn't the only one who doesn't think this is a good idea? I've been so excited about my opportunity to fly the F-16. I hadn't really thought about the challenges I was going to have ahead of me. And there were a lot of challenges. I mean, I'm probably better off at that point not knowing what I'm getting myself into. Because if I would have, I might not have stepped into it quite so willingly. But now you know how I got to be the first woman to fly the F-16. It kind of seems like a lot of luck and good timing, right? Get home from vacation, call your boss, show up to the Pentagon, here you go, here's an F-16, life's good. But there's a little more to the story I'd like to share with you. You see, that first airplane ride, that was my mom and my sister and I going to live with her parents in England while my dad fought in the Vietnam War. A year after that, we were all back together in Southern California, and my dad had a wrenched neck. And a year after that, Mom and Dad were divorced, and my sister and I were latchkey kids at the ages of 8 and 6. So I'm now being raised by a single mom in the 70s, which there weren't a lot of then. So as you can imagine, there wasn't a lot of money. I knew I still wanted to be a pilot, but I also knew I wasn't going to be able to pay for pilot lessons. So I decided I'd go in the Air Force, and they would teach me how to fly. It's a great plan, but what I didn't realize was that to be a pilot in the Air Force, you had to have a college degree. And I didn't learn that until I was about halfway through with high school. And like most 15-year-olds without a lot of supervision, I maybe hadn't applied myself quite as well as I could have in those first couple of years. Maybe. But luckily for me, my volleyball and softball coach, she saw that I needed some more guidance, some more support. And she kind of took me under her wing. And she gave me that support, she gave me that motivation. And more importantly, she helped me keep out of trouble. So I finished those last 2 years with straight A's and enough scholarship money to pay for my first year of college. So I was excited. I applied to 4 different California state universities, thinking that I would have choices. I had good grades, at least those last couple of years. I had pretty good SAT scores. What I wasn't expecting was what happened. I got rejected by all 4 colleges. Now I have scholarship money, I have a plan, I don't have anywhere to go to school. So I went back to Mrs. Garrett, who was my college counselor, who helped me with those scholarship applications. And she told me, pick the school you really want to go to, and we're going to appeal their decision. I'm like, okay. So I wrote a letter to the University of California, Davis. And I sent letters as well from my coach Ruderman and Mrs. Garrett. And sure enough, my persistence paid off. Your refusal to accept a no. A couple months later, there I was, driving a car as old as I was, 500 miles north, by myself, with a little flip map for directions, on my way to UC Davis. Yes, I still had no idea how I was paying for the next 3 years. I was going to worry about that later. I was too focused on trying to be a pilot, right? So there I am, joining ROTC, or the Reserve Officer Training Corps, for the Air Force, because that's how I'm going to get into pilot training. I actually had pretty good grades my first quarter of college. I'd grown up a little bit, doing a little better. So when I went to them, they said, we'd like you to take the Air Force Officer Qualifying Test. I learned that's kind of a military version of the SAT. So I took that, and my scores combined with my grades qualified me for a 3-year scholarship. So I had college paid for the next 3 years. Now all I had to do was work enough to earn money for a roof over my head and some food, and still get good enough grades to get that pilot slot. Well, it's back in 1984 now, and women are still very limited in what they can fly. So every woman that wanted to fly in ROTC had to meet a central selection board for the entire country. My year of the board, there were 350 women applied. They gave out 16 pilot slots and 11 navigator slots, so less than 10%. And I got a navigator slot. Now, 1984, no Google Maps, no GPS. Navigators actually were kind of important. We used, time, distance, heading. We used the position of the sun and the stars to figure out where we were and give directions to the pilot so we could go where we wanted to go. But it wasn't what I wanted to do. I was not very happy about it at all. I was actually pretty disappointed at first. And then, with the help of my mom and my soon-to-be husband, I kind of wrapped my brain around the fact that, you're still going to be in an airplane, which is good, and you have opportunities. Just because you're a navigator now doesn't mean you can't go be a pilot later. So that was the next thing I had to do, was figure out how to convince the Air Force to take me from being a navigator to being a pilot. And I know you all are pretty successful women, so you know the best way to earn an opportunity is to do the absolute best at whatever you're being asked to do right now, right? You have to show people that you're worth a greater responsibility or a greater opportunity. So that's what I did. I focused on being the absolute best navigator I could be, because I knew I needed my squadron commander, my boss, to recommend me for pilot training. And then I went to spend my own time and money getting my private pilot's license, so that I could prove to the Air Force that I was serious about being a pilot and that I had some bit of skill, right? I actually had some talent for this. 5 years after I started navigator training, I graduated from pilot training in the Air Force. It took longer than I wanted, but I got where I wanted to be. So now you know the rest of the story. As you guys probably already know from your own experiences, what sometimes looks like someone's luck and good timing, behind the scenes there's often a lot of hard work and determination and support from family and friends and mentors and belief in yourself. That's what gets you to where you eventually want to be, right? All right, let's get back to the F-16. I decided I was going to try to integrate the F-16 community with the same attitude that I had back when I was 10 years old and the only girl in my little league. You wouldn't be surprised how many people were so upset about a girl playing a game. There were lots of upset people. I didn't know what to do. I was just 10. So what did I do? I put my head down and I played baseball. I just did the best I could. And sure enough, my teammates didn't have any issue with me because I was actually a pretty decent little baseball player. That's all I was, a girl trying to play baseball, right? That attitude worked great when I was 10 years old, but I'm 28 now. When I was 10, I didn't think the entire future of women, girls who wanted to play Little League was up to me, right? It wasn't on my shoulders. But at 28, I knew that all the women that wanted to fly fighters that were going to come in the future were going to be judged based on what we did. It's a lot of pressure. A lot of pressure to put on myself, especially, right? But I didn't have a lot of choices. I was going to be the first. That's the way it goes. Well, there I was, on my way to F-16 training. I didn't know what kind of reception I was going to get. I was hoping there would be some people that were supportive, but I knew there were going to be people there who didn't want me there. I spent those first few months in academics, learning aircraft systems, studying emergency procedures, flying simulators. all while trying to prove that I belonged, all while trying to silence that voice of self-doubt that kept chirping at me. What if they're right? What if you don't belong here? And then it happened. My very first flight in an F-16. It was a 2-seat model with an instructor in the back, but I didn't care. We took the runway, and I pushed that throttle up to full afterburner, and I felt each stage of the afterburner light. Boom, 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 boom. The acceleration was incredible. And then I was airborne. I was actually flying an F-16. And that's when I knew. Nobody's going to take this away from me. This is what I was meant to do. Everything I had done in my life had brought me here. Right? That first flight across the Atlantic Ocean, playing Little League, struggling to get into college, having to be a navigator before pilot training. It brought me right here and it prepared me for this. I was going to be the first combat-ready F-16 pilot as a woman. Nothing was going to stop me. There I was practicing air-to-air combat. In this case, 2 of us versus 1 bad guy. It was my favorite part of training until it wasn't. All right, here we go. I hear over the radio, "Fight's on, 1's engaged." Now all I have to do is build some distance. 2's out west, build some distance, keep my flight lead in sight, wait for him to call defensive, and then I can turn in and shoot the bad guy. So I'm waiting, I'm keeping him in sight. 1's defensive, 2's in. I turn in. Where'd they go? I don't see him. Oh no. 2's blind. 1 knock it off. 2 knock it off. It's a cardinal sin to lose sight of your flight lead. After we landed, I couldn't walk slow enough back to the squadron, trying to delay that debrief. When my instructor finally showed up, he walks in with my grade sheet with a big red border around it. I had failed. Again. I was struggling, and I was going to get one more chance to do this right, or I was done. I was going to fail out of F-16 training. That's when I finally realized that if I fail, I'm going to leave with my head held high, knowing I have done my absolute best. That's when I realized I couldn't worry anymore about what people were saying about me or what they thought about me, or even if I was good enough. I had to focus on the one thing I could control, my performance. There's an old saying that became my personal mantra in F-16 training. Those who matter don't mind. And those who mind, they don't matter. I took that to heart. I had the unwavering support of my husband and my family. I had the support of a few of my classmates, and maybe 1 or 2 instructors. But I focused on that support and my performance, and I let everything else go. And guess what? I was a lot less stressed when I went to go flying. All right, this is it. It's my last chance. I've got to do this. My last chance. Mentally, I know I'm stronger, but I still got to perform. Over the radios, just like last time. Fight's on, 1's engaged. 2's out east. Off I go. Keep him in sight, work that defensive call. Here comes the defensive call. I know it's going to come. 1's defensive. 2's in. Pitch in. I see everything perfectly. I shoot the bad guy, I save my flight lead, I pass my proficiency ride, and I'm moving on to dropping bombs. Woo! Getting rid of all that extra stress that I was putting on myself, and I was letting others put on me, allowed me to be the F-16 pilot I knew I could be. It allowed me to fly my best jet. I graduated with my class. So there I was, on my way to my first F-16 assignment. My first combat F-16 assignment. We're crossing the Atlantic again because we're on our way to Spangdahlem Air Base in Germany. Now I've got to admit, crossing the Atlantic this time was not nearly as magical as the first time. Right? I was tired. I knew there was going to be people there that didn't want me there. I was going to have to start all over again. And I just really wanted to keep a low profile. I mentioned I was tired, right? So if you really want to keep a low profile, don't use your helmet bag as a carry-on with your name on it that says Preszler. So anybody who sees you knows you're some kind of flight crew and your last name's Preszler, because really it's not that common a name. But I wasn't thinking clearly, and that's what I did. My husband and I board the plane. It's a military charter, so it's all military people on board. He sits by the window, I sit next to him, we get up to altitude. And after a little while, this guy that looks like he's in the military comes and sits down next to me. And he introduces himself to me as Tom. And he starts asking me questions. So where are you going? Hey Tom, I'm going to Spangdahlem Air Base, Germany. Really? What are you going to do at Spangdahlem? Well, I'm going to be in the 22nd Fighter Squadron. What exactly are you going to do in the 22nd? And this is exactly the conversation I was hoping to avoid, right? I didn't want to talk about this. Well, Tom, I'm an F-16 pilot. I'm going to be flying F-16s in the 22nd. Really? I didn't know we had women flying F-16s. Well, Tom, there's not very many of us. In this case, not very many of us won. Me. I didn't want to tell Tom that part. Well, Tom apparently felt a lot like General Pete, because he looked at me and he said, women shouldn't fly fighters. The military's no place for these social experiments. You're going to ruin fighter squadron. You're going to cost lives. Whoa, Tom, I'm sorry you feel that way, but women fighter pilots are part of the Air Force now. I hope in a few years you'll recognize you were wrong. He just glared at me and went back to his assigned seat. Well, it turns out Tom was an instructor pilot at the F-15 squadron at Spangdahlem Air Base. And he knew exactly who I was when he sat down next to me and started this pleasant conversation. So if there's any doubt in my mind of what kind of reception I was going to get when I got to my new base, Tom had pretty much erased it. I was still hoping some of them would be welcoming, but I knew I was going to face some of those same people who didn't want me there. But when I met my squadron mates, if you plotted out their attitude, it would look kind of like a bell curve. You guys remember bell curves, right? So to me, the people who got the A's, they're over here. They're the ones who go, we don't care. Can she fly the jet? That's all we care about, right? And then we had all these people in the middle who really felt like this was a crummy idea, but they were at least going to wait and see how it worked out. Maybe give me the benefit of the doubt, or at least wait till I prove myself. And then there were those people over here that I consider they got an F, right? These were the guys like Tom. They never met me, had never seen me fly a jet. They just knew they didn't want me in their squadron, right? But I'm more confident now. I took my lessons that I learned in Little League and in training, and I reminded myself that those who matter don't mind, and those who mind don't matter. And I earned my way in the squadron. It took longer than I would have hoped to feel like I had fit in, but I got there. There I was, Dutch Mimano, Italy. We're practicing air-to-air combat against the Eagle Squadron from our base. Yes, Tom's squadron. So I spend a week in Dutch Mimano fighting against the Eagles. And amazingly, I don't get a single shot. I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do. They all seem to run away before I can shoot them. The other new wingmen, they're doing okay, but me, not a shot. And it got to where my squadron was rooting for me to be able to shoot an Eagle. There's a little rivalry between F-15 and F-16 pilots anyway. So, but this us versus them mentality actually made me feel like I was part of the team, right? Despite the fact that I didn't shoot an Eagle for the whole first week. I learned the truth of that deployment a couple years later when I was hanging out with a few of my friends from the Eagle Squadron. Yeah, I actually had friends in the Eagle Squadron by then, which is kind of cool. And I asked them, I said, hey, what happened in Dutchy? That was a crummy deployment for me. And they kind of looked down at their shoes and went, oh, we never told you about that, did we? And I'm like, never told me about what? Well, why it was so hard for you to get a shot on us? Like, okay, what is going on? Spill it. Well, we gave our controllers, the people who give them directions and things, we gave our controllers a code word. So anytime you got close, we would just turn away and run. They said, nobody was willing to be shot by me, right? And I said, are you kidding me? You guys are supposed to be the kings of air-to-air, and you're running away from a brand new wingman? Like, that is weak. I kind of shrugged their shoulders and said, yeah, we realize that now, but 2 years ago it made a lot of sense, right? So I was upset that they basically impacted my training because their egos couldn't handle getting shot by me. But in the long run, it might have worked out better because that's what made me feel like part of the squadron. After that, everywhere I went with my squadron, it's like I had 20 big brothers with me, right? Helping me out, and I knew they always had my back. So there I was, on my way back to Luke Air Force Base as an instructor. Now, I didn't especially appreciate my first time at Luke, and I was hoping this was going to be better. And it was. It turned out to be my favorite assignment. If you want to change the culture of the F-16 community, there's no better place to start than with the students, the new people. They haven't been totally ingrained with all the bad attitudes yet, right? So I was the only woman pilot on base, 9 squadrons full of pilots, and I only flew with my squadron, but everybody else knew me, or at least knew of me. And they knew how I was doing and what I did. And I managed to earn the respect of a large number of F-16 pilots while I was there, students and instructors. So that turned into my best assignment. But even at Luke, I felt like I had some of those in the spotlight kind of moments, because when you're the only woman on base, everybody knows what you do. Well, this particular day, I was having a small emergency. It's a little electrical problem. I was on my way back to base, and my little electrical problem kept snowballing, like bad things sometimes do. So by the time I came back to land, not only did I have an electrical problem, but my radios didn't work, so I couldn't talk to anybody. And I felt very much alone because although the F-16 had flown for over 8 million flight hours, this particular emergency never happened before. So I didn't have a checklist to help me out. No checklist, no radios. I decided I'd go back and land. I have to land sometime, right? So I land the jet, I lower the nose to the runway like we gently do, and I step on the brakes. And my feet go straight to the floor. Which happens in the simulator, but you don't ever want it to happen in the airplane, right? So I go through all my procedures, nothing works, I put the hook down. Because there's a cable at the end of the runway, kind of like on aircraft carriers. And I think, well, if nothing else, I can stop with the cable. I notice the hook unlock light isn't on, but I don't worry about that because all sorts of my lights aren't working. I pass the first cable. I pass the second cable. What we're taught in the F-16 from the very beginning, because if you ever get a chance to go out and look at those airplanes, they have the gear are really skinny, and we call them Preszler gear. They're not very stable. Your departing prepared surface greater than taxi speed, get out. So that's what I did. I reached down, I pulled the ejection handle. Yeah. Let me tell you what it's like to eject from an F-16. The very first thing that happens when you pull the ejection handle is time slows to a crawl. If you've ever been in any kind of life-threatening situation or car crash or something, I don't know how your brain does it, but it manages to kind of slow things down for you so it can process it better. At least it seems like it does. And that's what it did for me. Everything seemed to take forever. So I pulled the handle, and I'm waiting and waiting and waiting. And finally, I smell before I see or feel the rocket motor spiral. I see the white and gray smoke billowing around my feet, and I start moving up the rails. I'm like, whew, it's about time. Well, as you start accelerating, the initial G-force you are subjected to when you eject from an F-16 is 13 Gs. Now I like Gs, but 13, that's too much. And what that does to you is it makes every part of your body feel like it weighs 13 times what it normally does. So imagine your head weighing 130 pounds, right? The real problem, though, is that your heart is trying to pump blood to your brain, and that blood weighs 13 times what it normally should. So for a few seconds, seems like longer, it's probably not even a few seconds, I can't see anything because there's not enough blood to my brain to make my eyeballs work. But I know I'm moving, and that's good. Once that reduces, the acceleration reduces, and I start to separate from my seat, I get the opening shock, and I look up, and I have a good shoot. Yes, something is working right today. Woo! And then I notice my jet on the ground, and it is going super fast. And that distracts me just long enough for me to do the worst parachute landing fall the way we're supposed to land after we eject. Probably the worst one in the history of aviation. Instead of going feet, rolling gently on my side and just kind of having a nice relaxing time, I go feet, butt, head, bonk. Now luckily I still had my helmet on, so I didn't hurt my head. But the friends who saw me that were sitting at the side of the runway in their jets, they said I bounced. Now I don't remember bouncing, but I did crack my tailbone. That's a very painful thing if you've never done that. There's too many muscles connected to your tailbone. But I mean, I went from a day that was perfectly normal to sitting on my butt in the dirt, knowing that I had just totally demolished my $25 million airplane. Talk about being in the spotlight. and talk about being scared. By the time I got in the ambulance, my heart rate was 180 beats per minute. I was medically cleared to fly 11 days later. So medically, I'm good to go. Emotionally, maybe not so much, right? I mean, logically, I knew that the chances of something like that happening again were pretty slim, but I was still just a little traumatized by my time sitting on the ground. So I did what I tend to do when I'm afraid of things. I take a step back and I try to think about it logically, right? I thought about how my parents felt when they heard I'd ejected. I thought about the look on my husband's face when he saw me in the emergency room. I thought about my friends who survived their ejections and those who didn't. But mostly I thought about how hard I had worked to become a respected F-16 pilot. And I knew I was going to either have to go fly or I was going to give that up. What it came down to for me was my husband and my family still supported me. And if nothing else worked, my ejection seat sure did. So I went back to fly again. I chose to go fly again. But the lesson I learned from that, which is an invaluable lesson that anybody can take away, is I learned how to develop my courage by stepping back and thinking about things logically. So the next time you're facing something that's got you a little nervous or a big decision that you're a little afraid about, or you're going out and taking some new step, take a step back and think about it logically. What do you have to gain if you go for it? What do you lose if you don't? Right? How much is it worth to you? Is it worth developing your courage, or are you going to listen to your fear? Are you going to believe in yourself? And then I ask you, are you going to develop your courage? We have a few minutes, I think, Carol, for questions and answers. I just want to know if you guys have questions about anything I've talked about. How to block people out who are annoying and always want to bring you down. How to develop courage. Anything? Go ahead. No, I have not yet.
Yes, thank you.
There's a plan. All right. Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Go ahead, Karen.
I love sayings, and you have one about the mind,
Mm-hmm.
the mind and the matters. Is there a story behind how you made that work for you?
Yeah. So I can't tell the whole story in the top side speech I normally have, but basically, those who matter don't mind, and those who mind don't matter. Right? It's an easy thing to say, but it was the hardest thing for me to internalize. The hardest thing for me to actually believe. You can't just wake up one morning and go, I don't care what anybody thinks about me anymore. I wish you could, but it's not that easy, right? So what I did was I developed what I called a gatekeeper for my brain, right? Somebody that I can, in my brain, that I empower to keep people out that aren't important to me, and to let people in who are, like my husband, my family, my friends, if their opinions matter to me. The rest of the world, not so much, right? And then I found that it was a lot easier to have a visual representation of a gatekeeper. And I've talked to people about this before, and some people use a bouncer from an exclusive club, the guys like that. Some people I've talked to people who use the creature from Alien. That's a little too scary for that to be in my brain all the time. And based on my experiences, guess what I use? The security forces guy that stands at the Air Force gate, right? With the barriers that go up and down to let you in, and the pop-up barriers in the back to stop the car that tries to crash the gate. And then once you figure out what your gatekeeper looks like, you train them and empower them so they know who's important to you and who to let in. And then sometimes, although I like to say others' opinions don't matter to me, they still sneak in my brain every once in a while. So then you got to be able to kick them back out. When they start bringing you down, you go, that opinion doesn't belong in my brain. That person doesn't matter to me. Out. I'm going to focus on the people I care about. Right? So it takes a lot of diligence, but if you can figure out how to do it, you can do whatever you want to do. It's amazing. Yeah. Anything else? Go ahead.
You talk a lot about controlling your, what you can control, which is your performance.
Mm-hmm.
But given your environment, there's obviously a lot of influencing and not just your performance that brings you the credibility that you so deserve. Can you talk a little bit about like how did you influence all those naysayers and the brand
Yes.
population to ultimately respect you to the extent that you originally deserved?
Yeah, so how do you win them over, right? Besides just performance? Performance, I think, gets you in the door, right? Because in the fighter community, in most communities, if you can do your job well, they don't want to work with you, right? And this is a life or death thing if you don't do your job well. But what I also did, because I was the first and almost always the only everywhere I went, I didn't fight about all the little things. I chose my battles. Right? If I didn't choose battles, I would have been fighting every minute of every day and I would have been exhausted and I never would have finished. Right? So that was the biggest thing for me, was to choose when it was important to me to go, no, we're not doing it that way now. Right? And once I did that, if I earned respect through performance and through not creating a ton of waves initially, right? And then I chose my battles and I chose the things that were important to me. If you're doing something valuable or something different, there's always going to be this group on the side here who don't think you should be doing it. You can't do anything about them. It's this big group in the middle, right? This is where you can change people's minds. And you're only going to do that through performance and attitude, right? And we were talking a little bit earlier about when you show up, you be your authentic self. That doesn't mean that I had to fight every battle because I didn't agree with it. It means that my authentic self could choose what battles I wanted to fight. What was truly important to me? What was I going to tolerate and what was I not going to tolerate? Right? And that's how I did it. Does that answer your question? Okay. Anything else? All right, go ahead.
So you talked about being on that aircraft with your helmet.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
and Preszler on it. So okay, so maybe it's just a Hollywood thing, right? But all the guys always have their names on signs of planes and things like that. Did you get a name? Like how did you get it to you? How'd that happen?
Yeah, so everybody has a call sign in the fighter community once you get mission ready. And mine was Betty. Which really confuses people because it's also a real name, right? It's not like Maverick or Mace or whatever. But there is a voice management system in almost every airplane that's affectionately known as Bitch and Betty. Well, a friend told me I should do this in a training, but I wasn't gutsy enough, so I waited till that first assignment at Spangdahlem. And he told me that, so if you haven't seen Maverick, the original one, there is such a thing as like the hard deck, right? So we practice fighting, we pretend the floor is 10,000 feet. So we don't want to pretend the floor is the real floor because then if we mess it up, we kill ourselves. And they lose a $25 million airplane. So 10,000 feet, we would set a line in the sky in our voice management system a couple thousand feet above that. And it would go, altitude, altitude. And then you would know you need to level off, okay? So the suggestion was, and what I did is, instead of 2,000 feet above, about 5,000 feet above, I came over the inter-flight radio and did it just like that. Altitude, altitude. And the guy I was fighting with, who was looking over his shoulder at me, leveled off. Which gives me a great opportunity because altitude is energy. So I have to talk with my hands. Sorry, you asked. You have to dive down below this airplane that thinks he's already at the floor and then come up and shoot him with a gun. Guns kill F-16 left-hand turn. 15,000 feet. Right? Oh, he was so mad. Because as soon as I called that, because he was going to call knock it off because he thought I was below the floor. So as soon as I call the kill, he calls knock it off. He looks inside at his altimeter and he's like, So when the naming ceremony happened a month or two later, I was Betty. They were nice enough not to give me the first part, just Betty. Yeah. All right, I want to leave you guys with one closing thought. And I get asked this a lot. How do you go from a little girl amazed on her first airplane ride, right, to this F-16 instructor pilot who's respected by her peers? And the way I did it was I just refused to give up. People told me no all the time, right? No, you can't come to school here. No, you can't play Little League. No, you can't go to pilot training. No, you can't fly fighters. No, you don't belong here. No, 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 no. I didn't listen to them. I listened to myself. I listened to my family and friends and mentors. I listened to the people who believed in me. And I overcame every obstacle that I was given. And I tell you this because you can do the same thing. I know that women in business face a lot of no's. No, you can't. No, you can't. And sometimes they're a lot more subtle than the ones I got. I get that. But you know what they're saying. You don't have to stand for it. Right? Overcome your obstacles and follow your dreams.